Okay, well, welcome to Libertarian TV, back on the air or on the digital wave, shall we say?
It's on the air somewhere.
On the air somewhere. That's right. For the first time in 11 years, because I haven't really done anything with the site in 11 years. And Mark Noble, you're with me to help get this thing going again. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, sure, my pleasure.
Um, what got this going was, well, I've been thinking about doing this for a while, but one of the main things that got this going for me was I've been on a positive kick for the last few years and realized, among other things, how much positivity was lacking in my own life, but also how much positivity is lacking from the libertarian movement. Almost everything we're about is being against something, which isn't positive. No matter how you slice that, that's just not positive. And I realized that actually is rather counterproductive. So that led to a conversation I had with you on Skype, and we agreed, well, let's see if we can turn this into a recording and maybe get LTV going again and see what happens. So here we go.
All right, great.
Now, just before we start recording, you brought up an interesting topic because, of course, we're recording this on November 18th, 2015, just a couple days after the horrific events in Paris with the ISIS attack and so forth, or attacks, I guess. And you mentioned something about Lou Rockwell. Why don't you tell that story?
Oh, well, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about what to do about Syrian refugees even before the terrorist attacks. And I think the Lou Rockwell story was actually talking about that situation in general. And it was only after that story was posted that the Paris attacks happened. And it turned out, I believe, that one of the participants apparently came through as a Syrian refugee. So there are a lot of questions about what we should be doing, and in fact, the Ohio State Legislature yesterday, I was watching their House session, and they said, they're trying to curtail Syrian refugees being sent to Ohio. There are debates about whether or not they have the power to do that, and I just thought it was really interesting that there's a guy named Jim Babka who runs a website called the Zero Aggression Project.
Yeah, I know Jim, actually. He and I have talked about doing a show like this, by the way.
Yeah, and he's a really great guy, and I really respect what he's been doing with that site, and I donated to the site because I like the approach he's taking. I think it is very positive compared to some of the ways people can discuss things online. And anyway, he felt it necessary to reply to to this original post, and he tried to get Lou Rockwell to actually publish his reply, which I thought would have been cool. Mm-hmm. And what he's essentially instead, Students for Liberty posted it, and I was trying to bring it up, but I think pardon me if you hear a little clicking and stuff. Students for Liberty posted it on their blog, so that's where it's getting its press. But I think it's interesting that I realize that it's Lou Rockwell's blog, and he gets to decide what goes on it or not. But I think this makes a really interesting case from a libertarian perspective. Mm-hmm. So it's probably it's actually on the Zero Aggression Project blog. The title is Lou Rockwell's Not Libertarian Border Argument, and so he has a link to it. The actual article on Students for Liberty is called "I Want Lou Rockwell to Be a Libertarian on Immigration." So anyway, I was reading about it, and he was talking, I guess, Lou Rockwell's case, which I haven't had a chance to read his original article yet, but he seemed to be making a case about forced association and how immigration is forced association. But I think Jim Babka made some interesting cases. A lot of people object to an issue that actually kind of brought me to the libertarian movement, which was Second Amendment. And, I felt that the Libertarian has a much more coherent stance on Second Amendment issues than the Republicans or Democrats, mm-hmm. Or organizations like the NRA, which, they're not always principled on the matter. They will sometimes make deals. I think they're political realists, which has its place, but it's not necessarily a libertarian perspective. So I just thought it was interesting, his approach to it, and he was saying that essentially the free association argument could be used to ban firearms because I don't want to associate with people who are carrying concealed firearms, for example, might be the argument. Oh, and so then if you use the forced association argument the same way Lou Rockwell was using. Babka seemed to be saying that you could also apply it in other ways on other libertarian issues, like whether or not your neighbor can buy marijuana and smoke it in their own home because you don't want to be associating, you don't want that in the neighborhood. And really, I think he made a really good point about how once you dip that toe in the water, it's really hard to maintain your libertarian principles on a lot of issues where I think most libertarians are a little bit more clear cut. I also heard Stefan Molyneux talking about this free association concept of he seems to be very much against immigrants, specifically Muslim immigrants who, quote, might be suicide bombers going into France. So I think it's a really interesting dialogue. I've talked a little bit with some local libertarians, and some of them are ex-Republicans and stuff. And to my surprise, they were, they seem to be more in the Lou Rockwell camp on that side of things. They seem to think that it's completely legitimate to keep, people out of the country, not based on facts, but on suspicion. And
more accurately on fear. Let's be honest. It's really about fear.
Well, and a lot of this even started. Our local discussion on the immigration issue actually started because I observed a guy on Twitter who was saying that anyone who remotely has ties to Islam should be rounded up and put in some kind of detention camp just on suspicion. And I was kind of questioning whether or not we learned anything from the Japanese internment camps. So there's a lot of discussion there. And the local guys that I was talking to, I don't know if they're representative of the whole local community on this, but one of them seemed to be making a case that the Japanese internment camps weren't a bad thing because it didn't radicalize the people who were kept in them, and they've gone on to be a very productive and happy segment of U.S. society, which I seem to remember listening to George Takei, I think, has done a musical recently about his experiences in an internment camp. So, I mean, if you're criticizing our society through musicals and stuff, that doesn't necessarily indicate that you're delighted about what the United States did to your people.
I'm not terribly convinced either by the argument that they haven't become violent, so therefore it was a good idea, because if you use that argument across the board, you can justify a whole lot of tyranny.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's just really no limit to it.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm amazed at how, I think if you... it's a really interesting issue because I think if you start at the root, and that's what the Zero Aggression Project tries to do, and that's what the article does, is he cites various core libertarian principles or zero aggression principles that even if you identify as something other than a libertarian and have these views, it's really hard to like one of the questions he asks is, assuming that there is a Muslim who's going down the street to just to look for a job and to buy food for his family, if you've banned them from the country out of fear for the terrorist ones, then you're going to have to enforce that policy through force. And so ultimately, force is a gun for non-compliant people. So he was asking, was like, which libertarian is willing to stand up and shoot someone for looking for food and work in the United States? And that is an interesting approach to it. So anyway, I didn't want to make this all about immigration, but these are definitely some
it's
issues.
A good topic, though, especially the Syrian refugee topic. I think it's very poignant. It is actually quite good timing also, because not only do you have the stories you just shared, but I ran into some stories about it on Facebook that are very relevant, one of which was shared by another libertarian with me, and it's basically showing how the current attitude is really old news. It's not new at all. You expressed surprise and dismay that there are so many libertarians who are willing to close the borders and all that kind of thing, and that's true. I would describe them perhaps as being conservative-leaning libertarians. And there is a common theme that occurs more often among pure conservatives than among libertarian conservatives, although you find it there too, that I think is relevant to this. And I'll get to that in a moment. I don't want to get to it just now because it's going to ruin a surprise that I'm trying to get to. But this same person shared a story with me, and it's a story of a poll that was taken a number of years ago about a similar situation. It wasn't Syrian refugees, it was another kind of refugees, another ethnicity. And at that point in time, Americans were 61% against allowing this ethnic group to emigrate to this country under threat of basically being attacked, because that's what's happening with the Syrians. They're afraid they're going to be killed off by ISIS, right?
Can I take a guess at who this group is?
Not just yet. I'm going to let you. I'll let you guess, though. I'll let you guess. Okay. And
I think I encountered this through the Stefan Molyneux.
Okay.
I researched it a little bit because I kind of aired some of my thoughts on it on Twitter, and a couple of people questioned me about it, so I used that as a basis for a little research. And I was
well, let's see if we're talking about the same thing. I suspect we probably are, but let me finish my story.
Sure.
So anyway, so 61% were against it, and one of the reasons they were against it was because there were very real concerns that included in this influx of refugees could be saboteurs who might sabotage installations in this country, and which is basically the same thing as terrorism. So the parallels are almost exact. Now I mentioned that there was this other thing about being tied into something that conservatives are very strong about, and in this particular case, the reason that conservatives were strong about wanting to block that 61% are reasons that today those same conservatives would use to justify supporting those same refugees, which is a very interesting turnaround. So now that I've laid that groundwork out, who do you think those refugees are?
I'm guessing that those refugees were German and European Jews.
They certainly were. That's precisely right.
So
these were Jews who were basically in 1939 trying to escape Germany before the Holocaust.
Right, and so I actually, earlier today, I posted a comment on Stefan Molyneux's YouTube channel, because they seem to have people who read over that, and I don't know if I've never asked a question before, and I don't know how big his fan base is, so I don't know what the chances are, but he made the argument that during World War II, the United States or specifically the UK were not accepting immigrants from Germany because they would be saboteurs. And what I found is I went to a website that was all about the Holocaust and history, and they said that there were, by the end of 1939, about 40,000 Jews that had been relocated to England, and that I think by 1941 the Germans forbade emigration. So you didn't, that was concentration camp time, not, most of the people who were in Germany at the time were exterminated. So it was very interesting to see that and also of that 40,000, it said 10,000 were unaccompanied minors. So it was really about 30,000 adults. But one of the questions I asked, and maybe some people will answer me on there that I'm not sure if that'll happen, but I did ask, so that's like 30,000 adults, and now that we have the benefit of history behind us, how many of them were saboteurs? And that's, I admit that's not any evidence, and also the
I think it's more important to say, does it really matter how many of them were saboteurs?
Well,
does that really matter? Because ultimately, what we're talking about here, especially, and I'm going to start naming positions here. The conservatives I spoke about earlier are the same ones who today talk about Israel first.
Oh yeah.
How we have to be completely in support of Israel, and how we must never forget the Holocaust. The very people who shoved that line down our throats are the ones who are forgetting the Holocaust. The irony of that is astonishing to me, because it's so clear-cut. It's such a clear-cut, obvious thing that the only thing that's different between the Syrian refugees and the Jewish refugees is their religion. That's the only difference. There was the same risk of saboteur, same risk of terrorism, same involvement. The moment that you start accepting refugees, you're involved. Same level of involvement. same
Well,
level of risk.
and one of the things that's troubled me is that while it is currently the fashion, Islam and Christianity and Judaism are all rooted in the same holy texts and the same historical tradition.
Right, just different interpretations. Essentially.
Right, and I would describe, and I'm not a religious scholar, but my understanding is that where we are today, in which of those religions are bombing people in the name of God, that is largely, it seems to be social trends and social norms that are governing that, because in the past, Christians have certainly, there were the Crusades, and there have been times when
and there were Muslim crusades too. They went both
yeah,
ways.
and I don't know the history of Jewish crusades, but I mean the Bible is just full of stories of entire populations being annihilated, and in Exodus, I think it's 2022 or something in that neighborhood. There is a statement that I went to. There was some Bible site online that had. You could look at a passage from the Bible and you could see the same passage in like 27 different versions. Mm-hmm. And I found a passage there where this is the Bible that if I go into a Christian bookstore and say, please hand me the book containing your beliefs, they will hand me this book, and then I will flip to Exodus 20:22 or whatever it is, and it essentially says, well, I could look it up, but it essentially says that my interpretation was that it was okay to kill non-Christians. It seemed very similar. I should quote it because I hate to just go on hearsay, but
well, that's all right. I think I know where you're going with it, and indeed there are huge passages of the Bible that fit that kind of description. The thing is, though, the moment we start getting into biblical text is the moment we'll lose people, because the people who are the most vehemently in favor of supporting Israel, the ones who are most vehemently in favor of closing the borders, are the same people who are most vehemently in support of the Bible and Christianity and even a fundamentalist view of it. And in so doing, they are completely closed to any kind of criticism of Christianity and its handling of itself in the Crusades, and they're completely closed to any kind of justification or ramification or approval or anything that says anything good about Islam.
Oh, so I found.
So I'm not sure if that's actually going to take us anywhere.
Well, I found the quote. It's Exodus 22:20, and it says essentially, according to BibleHub.com, whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. Mm-hmm. It doesn't. No, I'm a programmer. That doesn't say may be destroyed. That says must be. Mm-hmm. So I could see if you had a radical fundamentalists, and there have been people on the abortion debate side of things who have gone and killed people because of religious texts. Ones. So yeah, I just think that Christian, Jew, it's theoretically possible that you could have a terrorist cell develop, sure, that is basing its justification for what they're doing on similar things that the Muslims are. And so this goes back to, you were saying that in World War II it was the Jews and they were, peaceful at that time. But well,
there's actually some claims that they weren't peaceful, and that's part of what makes it a
and so situation. That's what I'm kind of saying is that I don't know their history, but seeing as they come from the same roots as the religion that is not being peaceful right now, it's theoretically possible to me that there could be a sect of them or a sect of Christians or whatever who do engage in terrorist attacks very much like it. Or you could even have, it's pretty common in my experience to believe that it's okay for the United States to do drone strikes on civilians and children, and that it's okay because it's collateral damage. In fact, a guy I went to kindergarten with who frequently comments on my Facebook posts of a war and peace nature. He's a career military guy. He's actually posted some things. I don't have his quotes, but he actually quoted the Bible and said that essentially the children of opposing faiths, it's okay, they're fair game. It's okay to kill them because they're going to grow up and be adults in that faith. And what troubled me is that I have a lot of religious people in my family, and so I directed them to that, and I kind of asked their opinion. I said, hey guys, what do you think of what my friend is saying? And I thought they were going to backpedal and say, no, he's missing. No, to the one, they said, yep, that's what the Bible says. And so I really don't find it, to be that far away that, there are people out there who it's not just that I think that they have these feelings, it's that when I give them the opportunity to go against them, they firmly side with. And in fact, on Twitter recently, when I mentioned, if you do a search for, I'm Mark Noble on Twitter, just at Mark Noble, do a search for Mark Noble, Exodus 22:20, and look at the responses I got. Mm-hmm. I didn't get a single response that, no, Christians shouldn't kill people from other faiths. Not a single response.
No, of course not.
Every single one was, yep, that's exactly what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And, I talked with my wife about it, and she's like, well, people are probably going to think that by tweeting that they're not going to understand that it's, maybe sarcasm or anything like that. That they're going to think that you actually want to go and kill people from other religions, which I assure you I don't. But I just think that's a really, it seems to be a rat's nest that I've found here
I'm not sure if it's a rat's nest, but I certainly agree that you've touched on a key point. Mm-hmm. Because the key point here is that reason gets trumped by emotion every time. Because obviously, clearly, their arguments are not reasonable. There's not a shred of reason going on there. It's all about the emotion of their way that they're raised religiously, their religious beliefs, defense of those beliefs, protection of those beliefs. It has nothing to do with reason whatsoever. It has to do with their emotional attachment to it.
It's their tradition.
It's their tradition. Tradition is all about emotion. It's about how you're emotionally tied to your past and to the things in your past that you value the most. And if your past has some warts, well, you defend the warts too, because that's just part of a better whole. That's the way people feel about stuff. And because of that, that's where I've come to my view that we have to stop trying to attack issues reasonably as libertarians, because all we're doing is digging a great big hole for ourselves, a hole we can't climb out of because we insist on continuing to go back to reason every time. Reason never won an argument. Has never won an argument. It never even wins a debate, actually. Even if you look at debating societies, reason never wins the debate. What wins the debate is who has the most friends in the audience to walk through the yes or no door. It's never about who won the debate. It's who they like.
Well, I kind of, I have this discussion a lot with people because there are definitely some people locally in the camp that say we shouldn't be arguing every issue so rationally because we know people make decisions emotionally. Mm-hmm. So why bother being rational? And
well, it's not even just why bother being rational. It's that being rational is counterproductive.
Well, I think it can be, but one of the things that I think is interesting, and this is, I've tried to take a rational approach to things throughout my tenure as a libertarian. One of the things I've run as a candidate many, many times. I started falling in with the party politically, supporting Badnarik and stuff, I think in 2004. By 2006, I was a candidate for lieutenant governor of Ohio.
You mentioned Badnarik. He's the last person I recorded on Libertarian TV.
So, well, I'm good company. So, so I've kind of, at that time, social media was kind of becoming popular, and so I kind of came of age in the social media age as a candidate who didn't want to say a lot of stupid, indefensible stuff. And, someone once critiqued me to my wife. She told me this story. She said, that guy thinks he knows everything. And she said, he doesn't think he knows everything. He just only talks about the things that he knows about and is researched and is prepared to defend himself about. So it's not, it was someone who was frustrated that, we got in some kind of discussion and all they had was, I don't like what you're saying. They didn't have any evidence for it. And so one of the cases that Stefan Molyneux makes is that, the truth defends itself. I mean, it's, when I go and I get in a discussion with someone on Twitter about something, I don't try to make a rational case for something. I usually spend my time asking a lot of questions about why, about these inconsistencies between the evidence and what the other person believes. And it's not my job to build a rational case. So I don't know. It's not my job, I think, to build a rational argument in support of something or against it. I just ask a lot of questions. It's the Socratic method, really. And I had a discussion, and this is a minefield. I had a discussion this morning with a young lady who is from the UK, and she was posting about job stuff. And she said, "Hey, a whole bunch of men have applied for this job at my women's magazine. Why can't some more ladies apply?" And I said, well, I mean, my response was, are you going to hire who's best for the job, or are you looking to hire just a woman? And she flipped out because she was very mad that I suggested that. And to me, if you just flip that around, if someone were to tweet the opposite and say, hey, only women have applied for this job, can't a couple dudes apply? I mean, then people would be flipping out. Or in a case, what if it were complaining that only African Americans applied for the job, can't some white people apply? So that we have, and her response was, well, we said in the job interview, in the job description, that it's equal opportunity. Well, I mean, yeah, it says that, but I'm sure women all over know stories of people who applied for, they've applied for a job that said equal opportunity and they didn't get it, And so what was interesting about it is, I spent the whole time being completely civil. I was honestly just looking for her to explain, what she was getting at. I wanted to know whether or not they honestly were looking. I mean, it's an all women publication. They apparently haven't hired any men yet. So in a 100% female organization, and then she's complaining that only men have applied, it kind of leads me to believe that they're really looking only for women, but they feel the pressure to ask for everyone. So I asked her a couple questions about it, and one of the things that she kind of played this game of, men dominate all industry. Well, we have this thing called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and a quick internet search away. This was for the position of a writer for her magazine, and I looked up a writer, and women have 60% of the writing jobs in America. So she once again, she and her ilk, started trashing me by pointing out, we are not in the United States, we're in the United Kingdom. So I went, and guess what? The government of the UK also tracks such figures.
Oh, really?
So I looked it up, and I found that once again, it's 59% dominated by women, which at 15, that's only 10%. I wouldn't consider that an industry dominated. Like 90% would be dominated, but still, 60% women doesn't seem to indicate that women have a disproportionately difficult time getting hired in the industry. Well, then she started saying, well, but your figures are wrong because yours are just for writers, and I'm talking about technical writers. And I said, well, first of all, the UK didn't track, they didn't make a distinction, so I have no way of knowing if technical writers are excluded. But second of all, I looked at her job description, which once again is one of the criticisms, that the masses were howling about. I'm still getting, tweet notifications that people liked her comment, why don't you read the job description? Well, I did read the job description. You just made an assumption. I didn't, and everyone liked the assumption, but it's not true. And it says, to me, I'm an engineer by trade, and to me, a technical writer is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics defines a technical writer as. It's someone who writes technical documentation and manuals, and it's a pretty technical job. You're talking with engineers, and how you really have to understand how something works on a pretty low level. The position she was advertising for was, it was just a magazine that talks about technical products like cell phone reviews and video games and stuff like that. And it's like, I really just don't think she knew what a technical writer is. And I was talking with my wife about and I talked with my wife about it. And of course, after I pointed that out, she had nothing more to say. So I'm not getting any arguments from her. She also didn't tell me what the demographics of her publication were. My thought there is, yeah, it's intended to be a women's magazine, but maybe mostly men read it. Who knows? So why oppose hiring a man writer, But I don't know. I talked with my wife about it a little bit, and well, first of all, my wife told me that she was looking at job, like she was working at a florist when I met her, and she wanted to be an interior designer and stuff like that. Which I think you'd probably look and find that there are a lot of women in those fields. Certainly not disproportionately male, and I actually recognized her technical potential and encouraged her to go and get jobs doing tech support and working at computer stores and stuff like that. And these are jobs that, she's told me herself, I would have never gone out and do that if you didn't encourage me to do it. So it's hardly a case where I'm trying. And I also have a daughter and a son. So I really think it's important. I want my daughter to be able to get any kind of job she's qualified to do based on her interests. But I feel the same for my son. I don't want to overcorrect so much to ensure that my daughter's employed that my son loses out on opportunities. So I think when you have a son and a daughter and you help your wife get technical jobs, I mean that certainly indicates that I think that women should have an equal shot at things when it comes to all employment.
But I don't understand where you're going with this, because it started off on the topic of what happens when people advance rational arguments versus dealing with irrational arguments.
Well, I mean,
it sounded like you were starting to go there.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure where you're going with it.
So here, I mean, I don't know that it's a rational argument. I've just been asking her about the facts, and she's been.
And how's it been working out?
Well, she just got quiet,
okay.
And so.
Well, that to me tells us something.
Yeah, and I don't consider that a victory or not. But the interesting thing, though, is that it's the howling masses backing her up for having even though she was wrong, and she apparently knows she was wrong because she hasn't provided any evidence to the contrary and has clammed up on it, all of her supporters are pretending that she was right. Because they're not, even in criticizing me for not reading the job post, they're not reading the whole Twitter thread, and so they're liking something where their side of the fight lost. It's like
so what do we conclude from that?
Well, that maybe having those facts presented to her will change her mind going forward.
I don't see any evidence of that.
Well, maybe she'll think about it. I don't know.
If you're lucky.
But
on the other hand, there's also the negative side of it.
Yeah, but also...
I mean, because the negative side is it looks like all of her followers are against anything you had to say on the subject. But
that's because it's kind of, this is a problem that libertarians run into all the time.
Exactly, that's my point.
If I go and I present a contrary position to a Republican, then automatically I become a progressive.
Right.
And I get critiqued with all the progressive. And in fact, I was having a discussion with the city of Cincinnati is starting a new streetcar project, and they were talking about a huge party they were having to celebrate all the taxpayer money they were going to be spending. And I questioned that, and they said, "Oh, you're just a huge proponent of highway subsidies." And I'm just like, "Whoa, boy, have you got me wrong." So yeah, I mean, I think though, I believe from my experience that approaching people with facts and rational stuff is first of all, it's very easy because
it's easy, yeah.
It argues itself. I mean, there are facts and non-facts, and
but I have to ask again, what were the results? Because it doesn't look to me like you had positive results. It looks to me like you had negative results.
Well, the thing is, from my other perspectives, in the short term, yes, it looks negative, but in the long run, when I go around, when I look at the people who are involved with the Libertarian Party locally, a lot of them cite kind of the nexus of when they started thinking about the libertarian approach and researching it on their own is when they witnessed my interaction with someone else on the subject. So what we're not seeing is all the quiet people.
I think that's true.
We're seeing the raving lunatics, and also with Twitter.
But I have to stay on that point for a second. Part of that point is the idea that if by focusing the way you did, you attracted these certain people in. Now, the first thing I want to ask about on that particular point is, of the population of people who heard you, your best estimate, I know this isn't scientific, you don't know for sure, but your best estimate, what percentage of those people fell into that camp of people who started thinking about it and who started evolving to libertarians? What percentage would you say?
Of the ones who were simply liking and retweeting only her side of the
of the people who were hearing your argument.
Oh, it's very difficult to know with Twitter. And here's the thing, is that I do have some stat trackers connected to my account and stuff. And if you engage the right person in a conversation, which keep in mind, as someone who has been and will continue to be somewhat of a public figure in local politics, I don't want to say anything horrific or insensitive or anything. So
you're
you're
not trying to get people pissed off. I buy that.
Right. So I go at these, and if you look at anything I've said, if you look at these tweets people are retweeting, it shouldn't be anything to get all upset about. But
you're not answering my question.
Well, the audience could possibly be millions, depending on who retweeted it.
Yeah, but that's not what my question was it?
Well, and the answer is it's difficult to know with an environment like Twitter.
I know that. I'm asking you to give me your best estimate.
My best estimate is I don't know.
Run away from the question answer.
Well, no, I've probably seen 100 or so people who were retweeting it, but I don't know how many followers they all had. Some of them had 2, and others had.
All I'm asking for is a percentage.
A percentage of what?
A percentage of the overall population who found themselves moving toward a libertarian position as a result of those exchanges.
I don't know. I really don't know.
I won't quibble with whatever your number is.
Right.
I'm just looking for. Are we talking like 1%, 10%, 50%, 90%?
Well, see, I don't think it works that way. I don't know.
I think it does work that way.
I don't know of all the libertarian conversations I've ever had. I don't know which ones resulted in turning someone toward a libertarian perspective. I think
it's fair to say that when you have a conversation, you are providing some degree of influence, positive, negative, or indifferent. And I don't think it's outside of the realm of a reasonable conversation to ask what is the nature of that influence.
Well, and like I said, all I have to go by are the people who disagreed.
You have more than that to go by. You have a sense of what goes on in those conversations. We all do. And this goes to the heart of what I've been talking about all along. Libertarians deliberately avoid the emotional side. We don't even want to look at it. We don't want to explore it. We certainly don't want to swim in it. We'll do everything we can to avoid it. And the best way we know of to avoid it is to engage in Socratic debate because it's safe, it's easy. All we have to do is ask questions. We don't have to get involved in those slimy, difficult, emotional sides of things where we can get caught up in the muck. We can stay aloof from the whole thing. And that's the flaw.
Well, I think that there's definitely an emotional component.
Of course there is.
I felt...
I'm asking you to touch it, and you won't.
Well, on its face, I felt bad for the guys who had applied to that.
Okay.
And were apparently being passed over just because of their gender.
Okay, that's something.
So, that's what probably inspired me to engage in the conversation altogether.
Okay, that's something. I would suggest that when we engage in a Socratic method as a way of presenting an argument, that we end up alienating more people than we win over. And I suggest it's by a large majority.
Well, I keep hearing that I keep hearing people advocating other approaches, but I don't see those approaches in practice a lot. So, could you give me an example? How would you have won over that person on all of her followers, or would you have just simply not engaged her at all?
Well, assuming that she wants to engage with me, that's the first assumption. I don't go out of my way to engage with her.
Well, keep in mind, Twitter is a public sidewalk, okay? Mm-hmm. If I'm walking down the street and I hear, everyone always talks about free speech and everything. If she's sitting in her living room having a conversation with her friends, I'm not going to break down her door and say, what you're saying to them is wrong, But if you're on the public transit bus and I have to listen to you prattle, or if I hear you on the sidewalk and I disagree with you and I have evidence that I think if I show to people, then they might reconsider the validity of what she's saying, then I might share that and walk on, or share it and stop and have a conversation. So to me, I view it as more of a person standing on a sidewalk than a person who, if I'm on a public sidewalk and I don't want to have conversations with strangers about the things I'm saying, then I just don't say things, or I only say sensible things.
All right, so we're going to assume then that she is amenable to an interaction with you, or with me, whichever.
Well, she also replied several times. times, so that
Okay.
indicated that some interest in having a discussion, even if she initially
All
said
right. So
that
that meets my criteria. My criteria is she willing to engage with me? The answer you're saying is yes. I'm okay with that. That's fine.
Sure.
So now that we know that she's willing to engage with me, my reaction is going to be, first of all, I want to learn more about her position. I have some idea of what it is anyway, because we've heard the progressive argument on this before. But I also want to hear how she expresses it. So to that extent, I will hear her out. I will try to get her to tell me what her issue is. And I don't know what she said. I'm going to just make it up here because I have nothing else to go on right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll assume that she said something like, well, we really need to help push women getting into the workplace more. We need to stop this glass ceiling business. We need to get the men out of the powers of positions of power and control and so forth. Because if we did that, we'd have a better society. At that point, I think I would try to focus on just the pieces that I agree with. Because I can't agree with certain pieces of that. I can agree. I like the idea of women getting into jobs that they know how to do regardless of what the current political mix is. Especially those areas where there are more men than women. You mentioned you're a programmer. I've done some programming too. We both know our field is dominated by men. I crave getting women into that field. I've literally been trying to hire programmers recently for a project I'm doing that basically is designed to eliminate email spam. I deliberately looked for female programmers. I deliberately went out of my way to try to find one female programmer who could do the job, and I couldn't find one. It's not like I didn't want to hire. It's not like I was trying to exclude. I couldn't find one. So my initial foray with her would be, what can I do to reach out to women who are programmers and find them? Can you suggest something to me there? Because that, to me, is a much more productive approach. If we can find that, you and me, you, Miss Suffragette, and me, if the two of us can find that, and we can start getting that woman involved in programming my project, that takes us one step closer to getting more women involved in programming. And that, to me, is a much more substantive and progressive approach than trying to shoot people down for the fact that there are some industries that are still dominated by men. I think that's a negative approach. Let's do the positive approach. Let's actually try to build up. Let's try to build more women into programming. What do you say? And see what she says to that.
Well, and in her case, the whole point of this is that she wasn't talking about programming, which, I could definitely see her argument based on the stats. She was talking about a field that is predominantly women. It's 60% women in the UK and the US.
But that's the beauty of not arguing on a rational basis. See, I'm not trying to argue rationally. I'm trying to argue emotionally. And when you argue emotionally, you can change the subject anytime you want to. Because it's not about creating a linear rational system. It's about creating an emotional path. And emotional paths, they change all the time.
So by your own measurement, how does changing the subject to women in programming persuade her to maybe consider hiring people based on their merits instead of their gender?
It starts off the process by making her realize that I'm not her enemy. See, there's a certain truth to the idea that people buy from those they like. It's not the whole truth, but it's certainly a part of the truth. And especially in political realms, people affiliate themselves with people they like. True, those people hold many of the same values that they hold. But the way that they express themselves is what wins people over. The way that they share their values, their beliefs with each other. And if they do it in a way that is friendly and positive and constructive, they're more likely to get support. That's what the really, really smart politicians do. And I'll grant you, there aren't many of them. Most of them are really bad at this. Most of them, the most that they know how to do is to not tear the other guy down as much as they themselves got torn down by the other guy. That's about the most they understand about human psychology.
Well, it's interesting on that. We recently had an election here in Columbus, and the incumbent won, and he had some negative ads, but pretty much his opponent was all negative ads that I saw. And the opponent lost. And so then when I talked to libertarians, or even I had a coworker who recently ran for a city council seat in a neighboring town, and he ran, this was his second time running, and he did worse than he'd done before. And one of the things he said to me is, and I didn't go negative at all. Like, how did I possibly lose by doing everything positively.
But he didn't do everything positively. That's my point. I don't even have to have seen his campaign to know that that's true.
Well, he was, in my conversations with him, and I can't imagine that this didn't carry over into his public appearances, he was kind of defeatist and down on his town. Which, if you don't...
Perfect example. That is a perfect example. You mention positivity to your average libertarian, and they'll inevitably come back with something like that.
Well, and one of the things that we originally were talking about, we've talked about a number of very prominent libertarian leaders and stuff, iconic people, and I would recommend that you have Jeffrey Tucker on if you haven't already. Mm-hmm. He is probably the most positive. I think Jim Babka is very positive in his message as well, but he's also very rational about it. And I think Jeffrey Tucker is a lot more emotional about his arguments, and he's almost sometimes painfully positive about everything. I mean,
well,
to hear him talk about Uber and stuff like that, he's like, "Oh, Uber is the most wonderful thing in the world," and so I definitely think that there are a lot of people that would respond well to that, but I don't, and he would probably have much better stats on that than I have, but I haven't been talking to people and said, well, what brought you over to thinking about things in the libertarian way? And they said, oh, Jeffrey Tucker, he's just so positive about everything. Or
well, I'd be also willing to submit the idea, and I got to check out Jeffrey Tucker. I don't know him,
yeah.
But just from the little bit you've told me, I'd be willing to suggest the idea that while he talks positively, and that puts him miles ahead of all of the libertarians in my view, while he does that part, I'd be willing to bet he doesn't do it in a targeted way.
And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'd be really interested in hearing your assessment after looking at. I'm sure there are some YouTube videos of keynotes and stuff he's done where.
Because you asked me about the example of the woman who was promoting the magazine and trying to hire somebody. Mm-hmm. I was deliberately trying to target her with my reply. I was trying to target her sensibilities. Jeffrey Tucker, in his comment that you mentioned, was trying to target anybody who supports Uber. Well, that's fine. Doesn't really help anybody else who has, indifferent feelings about Uber. It does kind of reach out to people who are, the wild Uber enthusiasts.
Well, and
that's a very limited audience.
Another thing that
and that's what I think is wrong with that approach. That the approach is designed to touch and educate, and I think that's incorrect. The correct way to in my view, to spread a libertarian idea is to touch the mainstream. If Jeffrey Tucker were routinely touching the mainstream, I'd be willing to bet dollars to donuts that he would be well known as somebody who was a major libertarian recruiter.
Well, and like I said, I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe he's just bringing in millions.
I don't know. I can't say I know him either. So
So it's just my impression. I haven't heard, and he tends to be, I think, not so much active in the Midwest. So it may be less likely that I would.
Where's he located?
I think he's out of. I don't know exactly, but he seems to be a coasts kind of fellow. So,
okay.
But I don't know. Maybe he's from Indiana or something.
I'll look him up while we're talking.
But one of the things he talks about a lot is Bitcoin too, and I've taken a kind of I guess Socratic approach to Bitcoin. The people bring one of the things when I even mention it, people say, well, Bitcoin is ridiculous. I don't want to use a currency that criminals use, and I'm like, well, what about cash? Criminals use more cash than Bitcoin by far, and you seem to be okay with that. And then they go, well, cash is okay because it's a real thing. And I'm like, well, so when your paycheck is direct deposited into your bank account, and then you pay for everything with a credit card, and then you do an electronic check, like there are no physical dollars moving around. I mean, like there aren't armored cars moving around to transfer this cash. It's largely computer digits moving around. So, I'm not really sure that just being enthusiastic about something like Bitcoin, where people have a lot of misgivings, necessarily wins people over either. But yeah, as far as you were asking a little bit about, being positive about things.
I was just looking at Jeffrey Tucker, by the way. I was looking at his Wikipedia article. I think I know who he is now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where is he from, by the way?
I it doesn't show where he's from. I suspect that he's from the West Coast.
Okay.
Because he's the publisher of Laissez-Faire Books, and the last I heard, they're on the West Coast.
Okay. So yeah, he may be West Coast. He seems like he'd fit in well in New York or something. I don't know. But yeah, I guess we were talking a little bit about just trying to promote things in a more positive way. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot, and it came up at last night's Franklin County Libertarian Party meeting, is the idea of just building coalitions with people. This is trying to find people who agree with us and partner up with them. And I don't know, I've seen that idea come around a lot of times, and I've seen a lot of efforts to do that and to find common ground and to help people with their issues. But it never seems to come to fruition. And while there are some political coalitions that I see, some groups that do tend to partner with each other, it doesn't seem to happen a lot with libertarians. So, I mean, is it that just libertarians just love to argue? I mean...
Well, I think that's certainly part of it. I do think that's a part of the problem, but I also think there's a much bigger part of the problem. And that is libertarians do not generally have the language, the vocabulary, the story background, if you will, to be able to express libertarian ideals in positive form. Lacking that language, they also don't have much in the way of followers. And building coalitions only works if you have a follower base. If you have a follower base, then you're trying to combine the power of your follower base with somebody else's follower base and put those two bases together to achieve some sort of an objective. That only works when you have a follower base. We don't have one. I mean, we have a little tiny one that's about 0.05% of the population. That doesn't count.
Well, I mean...
I'm talking like a real base.
Reason Magazine estimates that, I mean, they look at national polls that are not conducted by libertarians, and they look at libertarian-leaning questions that have been asked over the decades, and they estimate that 20% of Americans are libertarians.
But how many of them self-identify?
Well...
Because that's really what it comes down to. You aren't a follower unless you self-identify.
Right. Well, I mean, they were talking about libertarian positions,
right?
Not identifying. And I don't necessarily think. I mean, here in Ohio, we are in flux as a party because of a conspiracy on the part of Republicans. That I don't call it a conspiracy theory because it's documented in court documents that they actually did have a conspiracy. But so, we may not be a party, and so that raises the question. A lot of times people ask, well, I mean, some people accuse libertarianism of being a religion, and, just to take it full circle back to the Judeo.
Well, there's also a very interesting point in there too, but I'll leave that one for a moment.
I mean, so if someone's going to criticize me and say, I wish I could get a federal judge to call libertarianism a religion because then I could start a libertarian club and not pay taxes, right? So, which is a religious.
We'll just call you Father Mark.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, if we are a religion, then not paying taxes is certainly a big part of that. So, not to say not paying user fees, but so it really, why does it matter if people self-identify as libertarians if they have libertarian views, which seems to be the case in society as a whole. People embracing libertarian perspectives on a variety of issues, but usually being a holdout on some others.
And that indicates precisely why the libertarian goal of creating coalitions hasn't worked, because while those people that fit that profile, and I've seen similar profiles, I'm not sure exactly what the reason numbers were. I would estimate maybe, depending on how you measure it, 15 to 30% of the population fitting into that range. And that's fine, but they don't identify as libertarians. They don't identify as being followers of libertarians. You can't build a coalition where one of the parties to the coalition doesn't really have the followers from the people who supposedly support their views. That's not a coalition at that point.
As someone who's been involved in the libertarian scene since 2004, so over 10 years, what I've seen is a lot of people who used to consider themselves libertarians no longer, they seem to be, they're not a follower of anybody.
Sure. That probably describes me. I abandoned the party a number of years ago for very much the kind of reasons they probably have.
And I think I've gone more and more in the direction of anarcho-capitalists the more that I've learned about things. So, and journalists have asked me. They said, "Who's the libertarian standard bearer?" It's like,
Yeah.
it's like,
It's like asking asking Anonymous who's the head of Anonymous, right?
right. I mean, it's a group of people who they share, I guess, a vision of ethics, but they get it from many sources, and it's really impossible. Like there isn't. I mean, you look at Thomas Jefferson, and someone critiques him for owning slaves, and you look at Ayn Rand, and she had a lot of really amazing quotes, but then she had some other quotes that people like to ignore or whatever. I mean, it's very much like the Bible too, as we covered earlier. There's some really nice, touchy-feely stuff, and then there's a lot about obliterating whole civilizations, men, women, and children together. So,
What's your point, though? I'm not quite sure what the point is.
Is it reasonable to expect that libertarians understand the need for people to follow someone?
I think so. In fact, I think we have a recent example of that. That's the Ron Paul movement.
Yeah, I mean, and I think he did have a large number of followers, but he didn't.
He had a dramatically larger number of followers than the Libertarian Party ever had.
Well, and it's hard to say how many followers he had. I mean, Gary Johnson got over 1 million votes as a Libertarian candidate, and that was the highest Libertarian vote total ever. Ron Paul, it's not clear how many votes he would have had because he was kept off of the ballot by his party. While it's clear that his ideas resounded with a lot of people, there are a lot of people following him.
Even if we count the states where he was included in the primary process, he got well over 1 million votes. I mean, it was way past that.
Okay, so but still, I mean, I don't know that we can consider. I mean, I would definitely put him up there as a standard bearer, but if you ask people.
Well, I think what it shows is that libertarians are capable. That's the question I was trying to answer. You addressed the question, is this something that libertarians can do? And I think the answer is yes. The Ron Paul movement proved that libertarians can coalesce. They can come together and basically be a force.
So do you think Dr. No was positive?
I'm not saying Dr. No was positive, but the question that you raised was, is it possible for libertarians to come together in that way? Because you expressed dismay over the fact that we tend to be very decentralized, don't tend to follow any particular leader. And I'm saying, well, there's an example of how libertarians did follow a leader.
Well, I'm not
saying it was a good movement. Don't get me wrong. I think there's actually a lot of things that were wrong with the Ron Paul movement. But it does show that that libertarians are like everybody else. We're emotionally driven creatures, and we can emotionally attach ourselves. And that's the key point. Now, what would happen if we were to try to attach ourselves to something that was positive and focused and reached out to a mainstream of society? I think what would happen is, now I can't prove this because I can't point to any evidence because no one's ever done it yet, but I think what would happen is, yes, there would be a coalition, and it would be a coalition not built by reaching out to another political group. It would rather be a coalition that comes along on its own as different people with different viewpoints. Some of them aren't even libertarians, but because it's presented in a very positive light, they're attracted to it. And the best evidence I can show that happens is the Ron Paul movement. Because despite the fact that Ron Paul was a libertarian conservative, he was drawing support from the left, which theoretically, according to every political theory I've ever heard of, and I'm a political scientist, that was my training in college, that's not possible. According to traditional political theory, that shouldn't happen, but it did happen. And the only way that you can explain that is if you realize that the people from the left who were moving toward Ron Paul were willing to put aside all the ways that they disagreed with Ron Paul because they found a couple things that really resonated with them. They said, you know what, that's still worth supporting. And that's what a true coalition really is.
Well, so what do you think the most fertile ground for libertarian positivism, I guess, or positivism would be?
I'd start with what the polls tell us. The polls tell us what the most important issues are from election cycle to election cycle from the perspective of the majority of the voters. In the last election cycle, it was overwhelmingly the economy. Healthcare came in a distant second, despite the fact that everybody was saying healthcare was going to drive the elections of 2012. Well, it didn't. It was the economy that drove those elections.
Well, I think
Right now the economy and terrorism are about tied in terms of being at the top of the poll. Will that still be true in 2016? I wouldn't want to bet on that necessarily. But nevertheless, if that were to happen by 2016, then the two main issues would be the economy and terrorism. So I think what we end up doing, if we want to really pursue this, is to start focusing on what stories can we tell, what emotional appeals can we make that appeal to a large swath of people on the economy and on terrorism. And I think there's a lot we can do with the economy. Terrorism is a tougher animal because terrorism is itself a negative topic. The economy is not a negative topic, but terrorism is.
I mean, the terrorism...
So it's a harder topic to address. It can be done, it's just more difficult.
The terrorism issue is an interesting one from a libertarian perspective because, there was a really good piece from Nick Gillespie at Reason Magazine yesterday where he talked about how the chief of Interpol, whose last name is Noble, but there's no relation, he essentially put forward the idea that you really have two ways to protect against terrorist attacks like the one in Paris. Mm-hmm. The first way is to build hyper safe zones, kind of like the Green Zone in Iraq and stuff like that, which has had attacks in it. I mean, it's a high security place, and so, but then he recognized that, like, okay, well, where do you draw the line? When do you go and put up all the infrastructure to turn a shopping mall into a high security place? I mean, we don't have enough money to do that in America, and I don't think people realize that when they're looking at the world through their own community. The other way is to have an armed populace that's capable of responding to threats very quickly, and this is what he was saying in discussions with European nations. So I'd be very surprised if Europe decided on the armed populace approach.
Yeah, I don't think we can bet on that one as being likely, but it's an interesting idea.
I mean, we've seen sporting events and stuff with heightened security. We've seen restrictive rules like people requiring clear bags and stuff like that. But these just change the parameters that it takes to mount an attack, and this is something that terrorists have shown themselves willing and able to do. Is they just it's common in airports. They keep moving the secure area further back, and that's where you keep seeing the terrorist attacks at airports. There was an El Al ticket counter event in California a number of years ago, and that was far away from the secure area of the airport. And in that case, El Al actually had an armed representative right there who made the attack a lot less serious than it would have been because the El Al employee just shot the guy right there and ended it. So, this is something to me that I think taking on terrorism from a libertarian perspective, I mean, when you look at it from a libertarian perspective, once again, here comes my rational approach, is that you have to look at the world and go, first of all, the chances of you actually being killed by a terrorist are astronomically small, much smaller than being hit by an asteroid or killed by an asteroid, statistically. And then, so then taking the position, well, I agree it's unlikely, but it still could happen to me and I want some kind of recourse to protect myself. Well, then you have to go into the armed populace kind of model. I don't think you have to. I think there is a role for that model, but I don't think that's the only other alternative. And I don't think it's the only other alternative. Another alternative that is put forward is a police state, and there are a lot of people in Europe that are clamoring for that right now. And then there's what we've actually done in America, which is nothing. And it's
I wouldn't say nothing, but
I'm not talking about our military interventions overseas because those actually can make the situation worse. But when it comes to like school shootings and stuff like that, there have been some, like in Ohio, they've made a program where teachers can go and get training and arm themselves and protect their students. But we keep
the left will tell you that they've done not nothing, they've done something because they're continuing to try to crack down on gun control.
Well, but the thing is, the gun control schemes that they're putting forward wouldn't have stopped any of the attacks that happened and haven't really changed since the 70s. They're this exact
I understand that. I mean, I'm not arguing that because I believe it. I'm arguing it because that's what they would do,
Well,
and
and I
that's
guess
essentially the argument that's carrying the day because we haven't actually presented a counter argument.
well, and I guess when I say nothing, I really mean we're kind
And
of
when I say
staying
a counter argument, I don't mean here's why our argument is better. I mean we haven't told a better story.
right.
We haven't told the story of how if you focus on allowing people to defend themselves, here are some of the great results that come out of it. You started to tell a good one there when you told about the armed guard at the LL counter who stopped the attack. Imagine if we had a whole bunch more stories like that. And so now there's a stream of stories coming out. And not only are the stories talking about how the attacks were stopped, but they also focus on the individuals, the human interest side, right? So you have the people who were present at the LL lobby at the time of that attack. And the attack was stopped, and it not only saved the life of the 4-year-old who was standing 3 feet away, but that 4-year-old has now grown into a teenager who is pursuing a career in astrophysics, and he's about to help NASA launch a rocket to the moon. Now all of a sudden you have a completely positive story out of a negative event.
So
we don't do that, and we should be doing that.
So on the LL example, do you think you're going to hear an NPR story about that?
I'm not looking for NPR to make our arguments for us.
Well, I agree, but I mean it's like the.
In fact, I'm saying that if we can go out of our way to create these stories, we're going to make NPR irrelevant. NPR is going to actually have to start coming around to us because our stories are better than the left. That's the problem right now. The left's stories are better than ours because we don't have any. We need to have our own stories, and they got to be positive.
On the economy, I think that once again, same question is how should we be messaging that? I think if you look at the data, such as the Economic Freedom of the World Index, it shows that people really do well. In fact, I think a lot of the Middle East, it would probably de-radicalize a lot of people if they had more economic freedom, so that they could,
I agree. Obviously, I mean, as libertarians, that's definitely core to what we believe in.
So,
but the problem is, how many stories have we told along those lines? We could be telling a whole lot more, and the economy is a much easier topic for us to address. The most difficult thing about terrorism, I don't want to leave terrorism just yet. I'll come back to the economy in a minute. But the most difficult thing about terrorism is the fact that it is an inherently negative topic. The word terror itself, terrorism, is a negative term. It is a term designed to inspire fear. So the moment you talk about the topic, you already have people feeling themselves in the place of fear. Ultimately, the whole goal that we should have where the topic is concerned, and in terms of our coming up with our counter stories, our alternative stories to help change it into a positive topic, is to promote the idea that we need to stop being afraid. There is no need to be afraid. And in fact, all of the efforts of the Republicans, the Democrats, the European leaders, all the Western leaders of the world, is about making us feel afraid. Because as Hermann Goering taught everybody, if you want to take a populace that doesn't want to go to war and make them go to war, you make them feel afraid. Once they feel afraid, they're very open to going to war. And that's precisely where we're at right now. So let's stop being afraid. Because all we're really doing with this fear is letting people take us into war. So how do we stop being afraid? We start looking at all the reasons we already can feel secure, regardless of what the terrorists are doing. Doesn't make any difference what the terrorists are doing. We can feel safe and secure right now without shutting out a single terrorist. We don't have to put up a single barrier. We don't have to do any of that because we have a lot of reasons to feel very secure right now. And if we start telling stories about all of the concrete ways that individuals feel safe right now, we change the dialogue. We change the nature of the dialogue. Now, I'll grant you, this is a much more difficult kind of thing to attack because we're attacking a negative. Attacking a negative is extremely difficult. But if we are going to at least look at that at some point, I think this has to be part of the topic of conversation, which is changing the conversation to something other than terrorism. At the very least, instead of going after terrorists, let's go after criminals. Let's rid society of criminals so we can have a crime-free society. And then let's make that even more positive, because even crime-free has a negative connotation to it. It has the crime part of it. How about a safe and secure society? How about a society in which it's safe to raise your kids to live happy lives? That's the story we should be telling. That's how you break the cycle of terror and insanity.
Well, and you know what I would, people often talk about when as a libertarian I talk about something, they like to tell me what I think and what I want and how evil it is. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to society and things like concealed carry and dealing with terrorism and all this stuff, what I want is to know that wherever I go, wherever my family goes, that if something bad happens to them, then someone else will intervene to save them and take care of them. And I think that everyone else should want the same thing. Mm-hmm. But what gets in the way is a lot of, so in that sense, I think libertarians are very trusting of other people. And that's how I feel when someone said, like just with the bill that came up in the vote in the Ohio House yesterday, the gun community wants to have guns in daycare centers. I would love if a competent person had a gun in the daycare center, so that if someone tried to cause harm, usually not because of terrorism or anything like that, but because of a domestic dispute or something like that, spilling over into that, I would like someone to be able to protect my daughter with whatever tools are necessary at her daycare.
What I would not want to do, though, is I would not want to propose the idea that I begin the discussion about how your daughter should be safe in daycare by saying that I want to arm the employees. Yeah, that's the last part of the conversation. Yeah. And we always skip the first part, don't we? We skip the part that says, daycare actually is very safe right now. And we can actually tell stories about how safe daycare is. In fact, I could even make the argument it's too safe in some ways. It's so safe that it's stifling the growth of the kids. But be that as it may, the point is, the statistics of kids staying safe in daycare are tremendously good. Libertarians, imagine if libertarians actually started pointing out regularly, routinely, how safe kids are in daycare. How the ability of kids to grow up in a safe environment is working extremely well in daycare right now without any gun control. It's working beautifully. It's been working for years. People have been able to raise kids in a safer and safer environment long before gun control even came along.
That argument, when it comes to the gun control thing, look at the stats. Look at the crime stats. Since we started liberalizing our gun laws, letting more and more people have guns, the crime rate has plummeted across America. And accidental firearms deaths have
But I'm saying don't start with, you see, you're doing what libertarians do. We always want to go back to our issue about the Second Amendment. And I'm saying don't start there. That's where you're starting every time.
Right,
and
just
every time you do that,
just say, look. Well, I mean, look at what people are saying. I definitely see pieces out there. America is safer than ever. Crime rates are down.
But more importantly, this is the key point here. It isn't crime rates that are down; it's that security is up. See, every time we talk about crime rates, even if we talk about the word crime rates, the word crime rates has a negative built in. That negative is the word crime. So now already we're starting to focus on something that's a little bit scary. Just a little bit scary. Okay, where's this little scary thing going to go? But now, what if we turn it around and instead of talking in terms of crime rates, we talk about safety and security and how safe society is? Well, there's no talk of crime there. Wait a minute. Where'd the scary stuff go? And now that the scary stuff is gone, now we can start making the friends that say, you know what, this is a safe society. You know what, things are pretty good here. And the more stories we tell, wow, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right, this is actually a really safe society. I mean, heck, we can go state to state. We don't even have to have papers. We can go state to state without papers. There are very few places in the world that can say that. We can do that. We actually live lives that are quiet and peaceful for the most part. That's what the experience is for the overwhelming majority of us. And the more stories we tell like that, the more goodwill we develop, the more affinity we develop, the more people respond to what we're saying, because now we're tying into where they live. And then after we built that rapport, then we say, you know what, a lot of this has happened since we've been allowing more and more people to have guns. Isn't that interesting? So we won them over
when
first.
You lose them.
No. That's not where you lose them. The reason we lose them now is because we don't build up the relationship first. Once you build up the relationship and they have the good feelings for you, now they're willing to hear that side of it. It's still uncomfortable, but now they're not immediately turned off because they like you now. They like us now. Our problem is we go in and we don't try to get them to like us before we make our arguments. We want them to like us because of our arguments. Well, life doesn't work that way.
Well, and nobody likes a know-it-all. I mean, no one likes someone who's always saying, "I."
But a know-it-all. What's a know-it-all? Think about it for a second. What is a know-it-all? A know-it-all is somebody who comes at us with something we don't like and keeps shoving it in our face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, the key phrase there is we don't like it. The only reason we don't like it is because we don't have any feelings of affinity for them. If somebody we like comes to us with something negative, because we already have that feeling of we like them, we tolerate the negative. So, we put up with it.
So, I mean, there is the fact that if it bleeds, it leads in the media. And so how do you compete with, I kind of, when I was thinking, you were talking earlier about, essentially trying to win people over with pointing out highlighting the positive. That's kind of like if you have let's say you've got a pet rabbit that's new to the house or something, or some kind of fuzzy animal, and you're trying to get it to calm down and relax and show it how safe it is where you are, and you're offering it carrots and all this stuff. And then every 15 minutes, the media comes in with a puppet of a wolf and starts growling at you. I mean, it's really hard to get that rabbit to
Well, actually, it's pretty easy. You build a fence out beyond your sidewalk, and you tell the news media, if you cross that fence, I'm going to charge you with trespassing. And once they trespass, then you actually drag them into court.
So how do you build
You basically put up the barrier, the boundary, so they can't cross that boundary.
So how do you build that boundary between the media and the public, who the public are the people that I'm trying to win over?
I don't try to build the boundary on the media's property. I don't try to build the boundary on the property of the people who I'm trying to influence. I try to build a boundary on my property and invite those people over to join me on my property.
Well, and there's a thing.
Do you see what I'm saying?
And here's an interesting thing that's happening in society, much to the chagrin of the media, is that ratings are terrible. Nobody's reading newspapers anymore. The media, the Fox News of the world, they're dying industries.
Oh, yeah.
So
to me, that's a great indicator of just how much opportunity there is for us to come in with a positive message.
So, I mean, I definitely think that kind of thing, you have to look at what people are doing instead. And I think what you see is, instead they're going to other sources of violence and carnage and
well, yeah, sure. That's human psychology. That's basic human psychology. When a human being is dysfunctional in nature, because that's what we're describing. We're describing a dysfunctional person. They've reacted well to bad stuff. The bad stuff gets too unappealing, so they go to more bad stuff from somebody else. Well, and that's the human psychology going on. And that kind of dysfunctionality will always happen because humans develop pathways of familiar behavior that they constantly repeat. This is something that psychotherapists discovered, for instance, with alcoholics and drug abusers and so forth. You can educate them all you want, but unless they're actually willing to take steps to completely change their own environment, they're going to find themselves going back over and over again. They're going to find that recidivist effect going on, and they're constantly going to be drawn back into the world of the drugs or the alcohol. They actually have to be willing to change their own environment. That's what makes the AA thing so powerful, but it also makes it so difficult. We have human beings who learn through their nervous systems to behave and to think certain ways. And asking them to change is a tough thing to do. There's no doubt about that. Because of that, we have to be cognizant of it. We have to be cognizant of the fact that people are going to be recidivists. They are going to go toward the negatives. The only way that I know of to change that is to offer them an alternative that they haven't had before. Because let's be honest, the people who go from one negative news source to another don't really know of an alternative. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go for that positive juice? Well, it isn't out there. Try searching Google News for some of the positive news. You're going to find it's an extremely dry source of information. There's not a whole lot out there. If somebody comes out there and starts putting out regular positive news drawn from real life, real society, I guarantee you a large chunk of the population are going to notice. They're going to say, wow, that is really different.
So the news media faces a lot of criticism on that, and we've established that what they're doing isn't working because they are failing in ratings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you turn on the local news on Sunday morning around here, it is just gushy, sappy, just ridiculous stories. It's painful. Now, with
Well,
the
you know what they're
exception,
trying to do? They're trying to actually play the positive card.
yeah,
This
but
is what
it's
happens when you have dysfunctional people trying to be positive.
yeah, yeah. Well, now one thing that I think is generally, there, I'm sure you can find some exceptions, but a show that I generally think is produced by the mainstream media and generally has some pretty nice positive elements in it is Sunday Morning. I think it's on CBS,
Yeah,
and
my
it's
wife watches it. I don't watch it,
yeah,
but
and
I'm
I
aware
mean
of it.
it's a very relaxed tone. It's
They have that really nice segment at the end where they have some sort of scene of nature for about a minute,
right.
which is really nice.
And which they kind of made fun of on the Daily Show with your moment of
Well, of course, they make fun of everything.
well, but they had the moment of Zen for a long time or something. There's some
Yeah,
show
right.
where they just show some strange, surreal thing, and like
But I'll tell you what, though, that didn't change my like for that segment on Sunday Morning or
right.
whatever it's called. That because I like when my wife is watching the rest of it, and I want to be out of the room. But then it gets to that part, I'll go into the living room just to watch that part because that's nice. That's pleasant.
Another fun segment is they show the weekly calendar. What's up for the week ahead?
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about like various silly holidays and stuff like that. Or now they do the difference between that and I think what you're describing is that they do say things. And next week the House will be considering legislation on whether or not to change the budget rates. I mean, so it is still it still has the fear element.
Sure, because they're dysfunctional. They don't know how to act functionally.
But it's not that there isn't all positive stuff out there. I mean. My daughter's 3, almost 4. I see a lot of children's programming, and Caillou would be a good example of a show where it's been on PBS and stuff like this. Nothing really bad ever happens. The parents never yell. I mean, why don't people? Well, and this really does tie back into the libertarian thing too, because when I go to the playground. I see people with all kinds of bumper stickers on their cars, Bernie Sanders supporters and everything. But when their kid pushes another kid, most of them go, "Hey, Jimmy, come on, let's talk about this. Don't push people because it's not right. Don't take their stuff." These are very fundamentally libertarian concepts that people of all political persuasions are teaching them because they're social. Wouldn't
it be very cool? Wouldn't it be very cool if we were to record all of those, or a bunch of them, and start putting them out there about? Isn't this great?
I think people might object to me recording their interactions with their children.
Well, we would obviously want to get their permission. Yes, so we want you to sign the dotted line that you're willing to let us use your image on a recording.
So, I think we spend a lot of effort as a society teaching children very libertarian ways to work. But I think are you proposing Mr. Rogers for adults?
I'm proposing that we recognize that. How much of that, what you just described, this libertarian side of society, how much of that do you think is actually in the conscious minds of the vast majority of people in this country right this instant? Because I'd be willing to bet it's a tiny percent who are consciously aware of it because it's not being pointed out to them. We are inundated with information. Isn't that what the information age's biggest complaint is? We're inundated with information, too much more than we could possibly process. So we have to be selective about it.
And people look at threats.
Oh, absolutely. People are always going to be drawn to where their greatest emotional attachments are. People are negative. There's no doubt about it. People are inherently negative in their nature. They won't admit to that themselves for the most part. Most of them will say that they're either neutral or positive, but you look at their actual behavior and they're negative. And yet, we do respond to positive as long as it appeals to our personal interest. This is where the Abraham Maslow pyramid comes into play. The pyramid, the pyramid of needs and all that.
The hierarchy of needs, yeah.
The hierarchy of needs, yeah. If you go through that and you identify what all those needs are, and maybe even rank them, although the ranking isn't terribly important, just identify what they are, and then realize how many of those can be addressed positively. What you begin to realize is these are all the hot buttons we can use to reach people. Just by talking to them on the level that they know and appreciate in their daily lives. If we talk more and more to people about how cool it is that people talk well to their kids when their kids get into scrapes on the playground, and we make a big, big deal out of that, that's going to resonate. And we don't have to make a single political argument. Not one.
Well, and that's the thing is, I'm not a libertarian because I love politics.
Right. I mean, who among us really wants to live politics 24/7? I mean, let's be honest.
I mean, I don't, and
I don't.
I can't.
I run a website that's political, and I can't even stand looking at it most of the day.
I mean, what I'd like is I would like to look, to look at myself periodically and how I handled things. I mean, we talked a little bit about my interactions with a couple of people on Twitter, and I think Twitter's a dandy place for experimenting with this, more positive messaging, because you get a lot of opportunities to do it. I don't know if you have a Twitter account, but I'd enjoy watching.
I haven't used mine in ages,
Yeah,
but I do have one.
I mean, I think it's nice because, one of the things that you were talking about, though, is, consensual conversations. And I think the interesting thing is that one of the things that I like most, and maybe this is a bad thing to like about Twitter, is that even if you're not on Twitter, I can talk about you. I can,
yeah, that's true.
Like, if you like or dislike what someone did, regardless of whether or not they're on Twitter, you can share that with the world potentially. Now, the other thing about Twitter is it's like standing on a riverbank and watching leaves float by. If one of those leaves says, buy a Volkswagen on it, and I don't see it, I'm not looking at the lake, or I'm not standing near, or I'm not at the river when that leaf happens to go by, I'll never know it went by. But I think that I think that I've been looking for some of the things that you've been saying, because ultimately one of my, I've recognized these own things about other parents and parenting, and I think people want to raise their child so that they are not a sociopath if possible, and so that they get along well with others and are able to articulate their needs and be persuasive at having their needs met in a non-violent way. But one of the people that I would say a lot of libertarian-leaning people got behind, even to the point where he had a PBS special, is Milton Friedman. And I've always admired his ability to talk to an audience. And
yeah, he does that did that very well.
And I don't think that he made people, he didn't seem to talk, at least in the videos I've seen, he didn't really talk about the bad things in the world as much as he talked about the good things. For one of the best of all is the iPencil thing that he talked about, where there's a YouTube video, just do a search for Friedman pencil. And he holds up a pencil, and he's like, and this is one of the things that I try to remember when we talk about like radical Middle Eastern regimes that want to kill all Americans or whatever, is that he talks about all the different parts of a pencil, which is a very simple device, and all of the people of the world that you needed rubber from Malaysia, you needed the graphite from some mine somewhere, maybe in South or Central America.
Right, I remember, yeah.
And all these things, and the ingredients for the paints and all this. These were not obtained by people who all agreed with each other necessarily. All they agreed is that they were better off if they traded.
Right.
And it was that cooperation. That's why I kind of have mixed thoughts about boycotts. It's like, I disagree with what this company is doing, so I'm not going to give them any money. And it's like, well, do you like Chick-fil-A's chicken? If the answer is yes, then...
And actually, I don't.
Right. But I mean, it's like, if it, I realize that what they, some of their policies have been horrible to the LGBT community, but if you look at it from a purely economic stance, if you're hungry and there's Chick-fil-A chicken there, then, boycotts seem to kind of fly in the face of the pencil thing.
Well, not really. I don't think so, because the pencil thing advocates the idea that you choose where you're going to buy the materials to build your pencil. You don't have to buy it from that one particular seller who's also in favor of apartheid.
Yeah, that's true. So, but it does tend to insulate people from the views. I mean, you don't necessarily know what the views are when you buy. We've made efforts in our society to try to learn more about sourcing on things.
I think actually we're paying too much attention to boycotters, to be honest. I mean, for me, if I don't like what a company is putting out and I don't want to buy from them, I don't need to get all my friends to not buy from them. I just go. I just don't buy from them.
Right.
I don't make a big deal of it, and it's no longer a part of my life, and I move on.
But there are a lot of studies.
Boycotters don't want you to move on. Boycotters want you to stay right there. They want you to stay on that terrible negative place.
But there are a lot of studies.
And I say, no, that's crazy. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, there are a lot of studies that show that people tend to advise others to make the purchasing decisions they have made in order to justify their own purchasing decisions.
Sure.
So,
but that doesn't prove that the people are going to buy based on that that dynamic. That dynamic is not what makes people buy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's the flaw in the argument. People buy based on whether or not they believe that their highest, by highest I mean most important emotional needs are going to be met.
Mm-hmm.
The classic example is the guy who goes into the car dealership and sees the SUV and the convertible. And this is a family guy. He's got a couple of kids. He's got a wife at home. And he's there to shop for a car for the family. And he loves that convertible. He can just see himself driving down the road in that convertible. And he tells the salesman, could I just sit in the car? And he says, oh, you can take it out. Oh, can I take it out? Yeah. So he takes it out for a test drive and so forth. And then he ends up buying the SUV. And the rational person says, well, of course he bought the SUV because buying the SUV was the rational thing to do. It overwhelmed his emotional need to buy that convertible. And that's wrong. That's actually the wrong evaluation because the whole reason he was in there in the first place was to buy an SUV. He knew walking in the door he was going to buy an SUV. Didn't mean he didn't like the convertible, but his emotional need was to buy that SUV because he loved his family more than he loved driving in a convertible. It was an emotional decision. It was not a rational decision. And when we start understanding it that way, when we start realizing that everybody reacts, everybody does things, everybody makes buying decisions based on their own emotional needs, then we realize that this whole argument about if you can influence somebody through a boycott, you are going to make them make their buying decision on that. We realize that argument is absolute bullshit. It doesn't fit human psychology. The only way that ever works is if the person you're trying to influence is already oriented toward the boycott. If they're not already oriented that way, they're not going to go that way. You're not going to build your boycott by appealing to people based on, oh, we've got to stop supporting Exxon or whatever. That doesn't do it. I mean, you would have the same result if you just said, I'm not going to support Exxon. And your friend says, you know what, I decided not to support Exxon either. It's the exact same result. There is no difference.
I think it's about time to wrap up, but I did want to you kind of, in talking about purchasing decisions that you made, I thought about something that, that I've interacted with people a lot on, and it's been very interesting to see how it works. You and I are talking on Skype right now. I'm a bit of a fan of Skype, and one of the reasons is that, for 10 years now, we've had the capability to do, to essentially call anyone in the world for free as long as they have Skype. And now these computers that can run it are getting cheaper and cheaper. And there are some competitors that offer walled gardens, like, Apple has their iChat and iMessage, and I forget what their video calling thing is called. But you have to own a Mac in order to use it. You can't have an Android phone and talk to Mac people over that. I've kind of put forward the idea, encouraged some of my coworkers to use Skype, and some of them have been kind of resistant, just because they tend to be a little resistant to technology in general, which is weird to me because I work in technology. So
I know the feeling. Well, I have very much similar feelings. I mean, I use Skype, but I do so gritting my teeth.
Well,
because ever since Skype got purchased by Microsoft, I just cringe. And I can just see how Microsoft is twisting it into their own little play toy over time. I was like, oh God, how long do I want to be a part of this?
Well,
but overall, I do like what you're saying.
Yeah, and I liked Skype before. I liked Skype before Microsoft bought it, but I also like Microsoft for a number of reasons, mostly dealing with the way that their ecosystem works together and stuff like that. But which I understand would not be a consideration to someone who has like a PC, an iPad, an Android phone, a PlayStation. That's not really a contributing factor to why someone would get it if they have already invested in not the same ecosystem. But one thing that I thought was interesting from this coworker who had tended to be kind of down on Skype, and it just shocked me, is she came in out of the hallway where she was on her phone, and she just blurted out, "I love Skype."
Really?
And
I was like, cool.
I was like, what? I was like,
yeah, that's cool.
And I was like, she has to be sarcastic.
No. I don't think she was sarcastic.
She wasn't. And what she was doing is a very close relation to hers was in a terrible accident and horribly injured in a faraway place. And she can't travel back and forth, and they can't be together. But she was able to go out into the hallway and have a private conversation with the person she loves that can't visit her and she can't visit them. Right. And that to me was a really interesting thing. It's like
it's actually something very close to my heart, because I have a brother who's also named Mark, by the way.
Uh-huh.
And he married a woman from Trinidad, and they are currently living in Trinidad. They just moved there. So I don't have any opportunities to see my brother anymore, lacking a plane ticket to go to Trinidad. Until he comes back or until I get that plane ticket, the only opportunity I have to see him face-to-face is via Skype. So that resonates with me very much the same way it resonates with her.
And I have friends that I actually met through other technologies, some of them now defunct technologies, that we exchange Skype contact info on. And we talk all the time, and they're on the other side of the planet. I've never met them in person, but we're good buddies, and we see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, and we have conversations kind of like the one that we're having now and stuff.
Sure.
And and I've never met you in person. I mean, I think I actually found you by searching for, like, I don't know how I found you, because it must have been some kind of...
It was a lot of years ago, I know that, but I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Well, and that's actually kind of funny, because I obviously wasn't looking for people to marry when I reached you, but I actually, in the early days, there was an IM network called ICQ that let you search for people by location.
Sure.
And and I was kind of looking for interesting women to date, and I just kind of took this rational programmer approach to it, and I said hi essentially to every woman in like every suburb and city near me and everything like that. And
do it today, you'll be shut down as a spammer, but then you could get away with it.
Well, and it wasn't. Yeah, it was. I mean, it literally was just hi and stuff like that, which I don't think most people. Well, I mean, I have this concept of the antisocial network too. It's like where you send a message to someone on a social network and they're not viewing it as that. They're viewing it as a way to talk to just their friends. They're pretty belligerent about how did you get this number? Why are you talking to me? All this kind of stuff. But I was just, it's kind of like if you. I read a book about some woman in New York who just decided she was going to go on a date every night. Just to see what would happen. And then she was not going to say no to any proposal, like no matter how unpleasant. And so she wrote at the very least, she sold a book over it.
Yeah, right.
But it was kind
got a lot of experience too.
Yeah, but it was kind of like that. And so I kind of looked at, that kind of approach. I just said hi to a whole bunch of women. And it was really funny because, once again, like 5 years later, this woman... she's checking through her contacts and she says, "Do I know you?" and it's funny because that woman, I'm married to her today. She turned out to be my wife. So it's really funny because it was the long game and it really worked out and really we get along really well. We see eye to eye. I mean, like I talked with her about this feminist thing, and she was this job thing we talked about earlier today, and she was very. She was willing to hear me out on it and listen to my frustrations.
Well, since you married her, you can answer a question that I had in my head. I figured, well, he can't answer this question. Well, now I know you can answer it. How did the book work out?
What, that woman's book?
Yeah. Oh, that was a different woman?
Yeah, that was a different woman. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was the same one.
No. Yeah, my wife, here's the weird thing about my wife is even though I fundamentally found her by just spamming every woman I could find, she worked at the only business on the road I grew up on.
Oh,
and
really?
I went to one high school and she went to another high school, but a lot of the people we knew had transferred back and forth between the schools. So we had similar social circles, and it was really funny when we moved in together finally. This is back when they had CDs for everything. We have so many duplicates in our CD collection. It's ridiculous.
It always works that way, right?
It's not stuff like the White Album or
No, of course not.
It's just weird stuff. And one of them.
Nobody has the idealized collection. They just don't.
One of them was an album that my wife and I were watching MTV at 3 a.m. and we saw this. And
she had the same one.
Yeah, and we talked about it. I'm like, well, how did you end up getting this album? Oh, I was watching MTV at 3 a.m. and I saw this song and it's like,
funny.
wow, we were watching MTV together, even though so.
Talk about being on the same wavelength.
Yeah, so it's really hard to ignore that, and like I said, she's been really receptive to my. Well, there's a thing. I don't know that I've always been positive with her in my. But she is a diehard libertarian. I mean, she grew up as a Democrat, and what she told me, the reason, she rolls her eyes at a lot of the stuff that I say sometimes about, trying to persuade people, and she definitely thinks that sometimes I can be a little bit unpleasant on occasion, which that's not what I want to be on it. But she said what won her over is the whole time she was growing up, she was raised being taught that Democrats believe certain things that are inherently good. And when she got older and she met me, she realized that what the Democrats want is not the way to achieve those things. And voluntary ways are superior. And that's fundamentally what but she was a captive audience for for quite a while.
Well, more than that, she was also the subject of a positive story.
Right.
Because you guys wouldn't be together if you had a negative relationship.
Right.
It just wouldn't. I mean, those fall apart. They may take some time, but they eventually fall apart. You guys would not be going strong if there was no positivity going on. It's the positive side that makes that relationship work. And it's the positive side that provided the backstory, the context, the foundation upon which she was able to examine your beliefs and say, oh, you know what, there's some good stuff there. Well, it didn't allow all the negative arguing to get in the way. It was the positive relationship made that possible.
And I wish I had a transcript of what our first chat was after she told me, but I'm betting it wasn't opining on some refugee crisis or something.
I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't because it never has anything to do with positions on issues. It has to do with building relationship. Relationship is the basis for how we decide whether we like somebody. We don't like somebody because of their political beliefs. We like them because we like them. We like who they are. We like what their values are. We share things in common. We have certain differences that are counterpoint to each other that work really well. It's that stuff, and it all has an emotional context. That's what makes the whole thing work. In that framework, then you introduced your libertarian ideas, and she was receptive because she felt good about you.
Well, I mean, I think that, I've talked with a couple of people before about, frankly, why they put up with me. And one of the things that these are people that definitely on numerous occasions objected strongly to things I was doing or saying. And I said, well, okay, why put up with me at all then if I'm so terrible or whatever? And they said that it was because they hadn't really known a lot of people who were as principled as I was, essentially. So
okay,
it's
so
just
it was a good side. That's
yeah.
good.
So I mean, essentially, it's just I'm, I guess, genuine and principled, and so they thought I don't know, there was some and weird. They said I was weird, so. I don't know. I think a lot of libertarians are pretty weird.
And you know what weird usually means? Weird usually means I'm not familiar with that, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah. I'm definitely not attracted to anything that is mainstream and mundane, and
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's so anyway. It's been an interesting conversation. You've given me a ton to think about on this, and I hope we can continue to chat online about these things, because I'd really like to see, your thoughts on some of these key issues. And I've thought a little bit about some projects I'd kind of like to do, and one of the things I recognize is that the approach that the Libertarian Party at my county level, at the state level, at the national level, it's not working as well as I think it should be. And so I'd like to, and like I said, I'm not married to a political party on this stuff. I am, it's more about
Well, I divorced mine, so
It's more about getting these things, you know, getting the right stuff out there and getting people to see that it really is better for them than some of the alternatives that they're currently supporting. So
yeah, I agree. I'd love to continue the conversation. I think we should, try to work out a regular basis to do these. And if we're going to do that, I'll look around to see if I can find some software that'll allow us to do video as well, so people can see us.
yeah, and I can.
As we talk to each other, and we actually look like human beings instead of disembodied voices.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, I really like kind of I like to answer people's questions, or at least think about issues that other people are bringing up a lot. So if it's possible to have some kind of listener mail, I mean, I don't know where you're going to post this, but hopefully there's a way to provide comments and feedback, and I'd love to think about them. And that's the thing too, that
well, if you're okay with it, I'm thinking I'll put this on Libertarian TV website, and I'll put it up on YouTube, and then we can just do whatever we want to share.
Yeah, we can look at the comments there and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think is kind of interesting with libertarians too, is that if you if someone does listen to this program and they think that something that either of us said was completely off base, then I think libertarians are pretty good at hearing people out on that kind of stuff. And I know that I'm not.
Hey, the cool thing about Skype is we can do group conversations in video.
Yeah.
So we can bring guests in and we can have 3 or 4-way conversations.
Well, if you want to have a fun conversation, you might want to talk to. I have a friend who works at the Museum of Natural History in New York, and he has referred to himself as anarcho-socialist and stuff like that.
Okay,
this
I know
could be
that type.
an interesting conversation, because we agree on some things and we disagree on others. It's a really interesting conversation, and I've always kind of wanted to do a talk show with him, on cable access or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
Now he lives in New York, and I'm back here.
Well, that's the fun part. I mean, because I do other shows like this kind of thing. I mean, not on Libertarian, on other topics, but having guests in and doing that kind of exchange of ideas and beliefs and values and stories is fun.
Well, the thing that's
it's really, really fun.
The thing that's most challenging to me is that he, at least in the past, he's expressed he has a very strong belief that his employers enslave him in a very literal sense. And I think it's funny because he works for the Museum of Natural History. The Museum of Natural History is...
Well, maybe he feels like an exhibit. Who knows?
They're enslaving him. And so I'm sure he would object to that characterization, but that's why I'd like to have him onto the show, so that he can explain better and we can have a fun conversation about it. Because, the funny thing is I actually met him. The project that we wanted to work on, there was a thing back in the 90s called the Artemis Project. And what was it that I was working on with this anarcho-socialist? It was we'd concluded that NASA was not going back to the moon fast enough, so we wanted to use the free market to have a private company stood up to build a moon base and the means of getting there and all this kind of stuff, which I think is really interesting.
I mean, was he a supporter of Spaceship One?
He seems to be a generally pro-science guy and stuff like that, but it'd be an interesting conversation. That's one of the things I'd like to hear about, is the Artemis project, and why, has he changed since then? Does he think that space exploration can only be done at the barrel of the gun now, or is he still on board with that? So it'd be a very interesting conversation, I think. So
I had a boss one time, many, many years ago, that I worked for, and he also had an assistant who was like the main supervisor of the company. It was a pre-press company, and the boss, I had him take the world's smallest political quiz.
Oh yeah.
He came out 100% perfect statist.
Oh yeah. And
his assistant came 95% statist. The only thing that he was libertarian on was Second Amendment.
Huh.
And working for those two was really a fascinating experience, because I did have some conversations with them. I was like their third lieutenant. I was I was the night supervisor, basically. And in the course of conversing with these people, I found, first of all, that everything about them is fear-driven. And second of all, they never admit that. In fact, from their viewpoint, they argue from what they believe is a position of strength. And that fascinated me, because what that really tells me is that even someone who has a very dysfunctional point of view, a very fear-driven point of view, can convince themselves that they're safe, can convince themselves that they're meeting basic emotional needs. And in essence, that's what makes liberalism, conservatism, statism, all the isms possible, because they can tell stories that say, here's how we make you feel better. So if they can do it, hell, imagine how much better we can do it. We got a whole lot more material to work with than they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the really cool part.
All right. Well,
So,
it's been great talking with you, and
yeah,
hope
great
to
talking
talk
to
you
you too.
again. So,
let's arrange some times, offline, and figure out when we're going to do this again.
all right.
See if we can do this on a regular basis.
All right. Well, you have a good.
Thanks, Mark.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.